Standing in the shadow of an ancient amphitheater, you can almost hear the echoes of history, the clash of swords, the roar of the crowd, the solemn chants rising to the heavens. These towering structures were more than just stages for gladiators. They were sacred spaces where the line between war and worship blurred into something extraordinary. Think about it. How could a single design serve both the chaos of combat and the quiet reverence of prayer? The answer lies in the genius of ancient architects who crafted these arenas as mirrors of their world, a world where the divine and the deadly walked hand in hand. Picture the Colosseum, its massive arches stretching toward the sky, or the lesser-known amphitheaters tucked into the hillsides of forgotten cities. Each one was a masterpiece of duality, built to host spectacles of brutality one day and ceremonies of devotion the next. But why? What drove these civilizations to merge such seemingly opposite purposes into a single space? The truth is, these amphitheaters weren't just buildings, they were reflections of a deeper belief system, where victory in battle was a gift from the gods, and every drop of blood spilled was an offering. The crowds didn't just come for entertainment, they came to witness a sacred dialogue between humanity and the divine. Today, we're peeling back the layers of time to uncover the secrets of these ancient marvels. How did their designs amplify both the screams of the arena and the whispers of prayer? What hidden symbols lie etched into their stones, waiting to be decoded? And why do these echoes of war and worship still resonate with us centuries later? This isn't just a journey through ruins. It's a voyage into the heart of what it meant to be human in a world where every moment was a balance between life and death, faith and fury. So step inside and let's unravel the mystery together. By the end, you'll never look at these ancient wonders the same way again. The rugged landscapes of ancient Greece and Rome didn't just challenge their builders, they inspired them. Picture a world without bulldozers or cranes, where every stone had to be hauled by hand and every curve of the land dictated the limits of construction. This is where the amphitheater was born, not as a defiance of nature, but as a collaboration with it. Architects didn't fight the hillsides, they embraced them, carving seating into the slopes like a sculptor revealing the form hidden in marble. The result, a design so intuitive it feels almost organic, a bowl of stone cradling crowds with perfect sightlines, where even a whisper from the arena floor could climb to the highest rows. But why this shape? Why not build square or rectangular like so many other ancient structures? The answer lies in the dual purpose of these spaces. A circle or oval puts every seat close to the action, whether it's a gladiator's sword strike or a priest's invocation. There are no bad angles, no obstructed views, just an unbroken connection between spectator and spectacle. And the acoustics, they're no accident either. The curvature captures sound, bouncing chants, cheers, and battle cries upward in a way that feels almost supernatural. It's as if the architects understood something profound about human experience, that whether you're there for prayer or combat, you needed to feel it in your bones. Take the theater of Amphitheaters in Greece, nestled into a pine-covered hillside. Its limestone seats don't just face the stage, they seem to lean into it, creating an intimacy that defies its massive size. Even today, a coin dropped at the center can be heard in the very last row. Or consider Pompeii's amphitheater, one of the oldest surviving examples, where the volcanic earth itself became part of the structure. These weren't just buildings imposed on the land, they were conversations with it, each curve and tier a response to the terrain's whispers. This harmony between earth and architecture reveals a deeper truth. These spaces weren't just functional. They were sacred geometry in stone, designed to amplify not just sound but emotion. Whether hosting a sacred procession or a mock naval battle, the amphitheater's form ensured that every gasp, every hymn, every clash of steel would ripple through the crowd like a shared heartbeat. And that's the real genius of their design. They turned geography into a kind of magic, where the very ground beneath your feet became part of the spectacle. The Colosseum wasn't just a stage for bloodshed, it was a temple of tension, where every sword swing carried the weight of the divine. Step onto its sand-covered floor, and you're standing atop a hidden world of rituals and reckonings. Beneath the arena, priests moved through shadowy chambers, burning incense and offering prayers to Mars, the god of war, and Nemesis, the enforcer of fate. These weren't mere formalities, they were vital acts that transformed combat into ceremony. When a gladiator raised his weapon, he wasn't just fighting for his life, he was performing a sacred dance, one that blurred the line between martyr and entertainer. Consider the gladiators themselves, often prisoners of war or enslaved men, yet elevated to near mythic status. They trained in schools that doubled as shrines, where statues of Hercules and Mercury watched over their drills. Before entering the arena, they'd salute the emperor not just as a ruler, but as the high priest of Rome. Even their armor bore symbols of gods, helmets etched with serpents for protection, shields adorned with Medusa to paralyze foes with fear. To the crowd, these fighters were both athletes and offerings, their spilled blood a sacrifice to maintain Rome's favor with the gods. And what of the spectators? They weren't passive observers but participants in a grand ritual. The seating arrangement mirrored Roman society's hierarchy: senators in front, plebeians in back, but also the celestial order, with the emperor's box positioned like Jupiter's throne on Olympus. When the crowd roared, their voices weren't just noise, they were a chorus of collective will, their thumbs up or thumbs down gestures believed to channel divine judgment. Even the arena's sand, freshly raked between matches, served a dual purpose, soaking up blood to keep footing sure, but also symbolizing purification, as if each new layer reset the space for another sacred performance. This fusion of faith and ferocity wasn't unique to Rome. From the Greek theaters where Dionysian rites gave birth to drama, to the Mayan ball courts where games reenacted cosmic battles, ancient cultures understood that spectacle could be spiritual. But the Colosseum perfected this alchemy. Its very architecture whispered of duality, outer walls decorated with triumphal arches celebrating military conquests, inner corridors lined with altars to victory and fortune. Even the vomitoria, those ingenious passageways that swallowed and disgorged thousands, hinted at cycles of life and death, consumption and renewal. So when we marvel at these ruins today, we're not just seeing stones. We're witnessing the blueprint of a civilization that saw no contradiction between piety and pageantry, that believed the gods demanded both prayers and performances. The Colosseum's true genius wasn't its size or engineering. It was its ability to make slaughter sacred, to turn chaos into communion. In its shadow, we glimpse a world where every cheer was a hymn, every fight a funeral rite, and every drop of blood a bridge between earth and heaven. Greek theaters rose from the slopes like open arms embracing the sky, their semicircular stages designed to carry the voices of poets and philosophers to every listening ear. Unlike the enclosed violence of Roman amphitheaters, these were spaces of revelation, where masks amplified emotions and choruses echoed the collective conscience of a society wrestling with morality. The plays performed here weren't mere entertainment. They were sacred offerings to Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy, whose festivals birthed theater itself. Every tragedy exploring fate, every comedy mocking human folly, was a form of worship blurring the line between actor and acolyte. Roman architects took this blueprint and remade it in blood and sand. Where Greek theaters faced hillsides to harness natural acoustics, Roman amphitheaters stood as freestanding marvels of engineering, their concentric arches containing chaos within geometric perfection. The shift from Dionysian revelry to gladiatorial combat wasn't just a change in programming. It reflected Rome's obsession with discipline, conquest, and the visceral thrill of mortal struggle. Yet even here, the sacred lingered. Before battles, gladiators paraded past shrines to Jupiter, their armor clinking like temple bells. The crowd's roar wasn't just bloodlust, it was a chorus of approval for the empire's divine mandate. The materials themselves whispered of this divide. Greek theaters favored local limestone, their seats blending into the landscape like extensions of the earth, while Roman amphitheaters flaunted imported marble and travertine, symbols of imperial reach. The theater of Epidaurus, with its mathematical precision amplifying whispers, stood in stark contrast to the Colosseum's labyrinth of trapdoors and elevators, one designed to elevate the soul, the other to orchestrate spectacle. But beneath these differences lay a shared truth. Both cultures understood that collective gathering required ritual, whether through the catharsis of Oedipus's downfall or the gasp of a gladiator's final stand. These spaces transformed individual spectators into a unified body, breathing together under the gaze of the gods. The Greeks sought enlightenment through empathy, the Romans through endurance, yet both architectures achieved the same end, a communion between mortal and divine, staged on stones that still echo with their purpose. Blood spilled in the arena wasn't just a spectacle, it was a sacred transaction, a language the ancients believed the gods understood. When a gladiator fell, his last breath wasn't just entertainment. It was a plea to the divine, a bargaining chip for fertile harvests or military victories. Roman historians like Livy wrote of games vowed to Jupiter during crises where the number of fights mirrored the gravity of the threat. A drought might demand 10 pairs of combatants, a looming war 50. The sand drank their blood not as waste but as libation, turning each match into a grim arithmetic of salvation. This wasn't unique to Rome. Across the Mediterranean, cultures shared this visceral theology. The Etruscans, who influenced early Roman practices, staged funeral games where slain prisoners became messengers to the underworld. Even the Greeks, though they recoiled from Rome's arena bloodshed, honored fallen heroes with athletic contests at tomb sites, believing the dead craved the energy of the living. The amphitheater became a liminal space, not quite battlefield, not quite temple, but a bridge between both. Consider the ritual tools hidden in plain sight. The gladiator's sword, though lethal, often bore inscriptions invoking divine protection. The whip used to drive beasts into the arena was woven with threads from priestly garments. Even the timing of events followed sacred calendars. Mid-afternoon fights coincided with the hour Mars was strongest in the sky, while executions at dawn mirrored sacrifices to the rising sun god Sol. Every detail whispered that this violence wasn't random, it was choreographed divinity. Yet the most striking evidence lies in the aftermath. Unlike the corpses of criminals left to rot, fallen gladiators were often given rites reserved for the pious. Their bodies were anointed with oils, their weapons buried as grave goods, and some were even memorialized with epitaphs calling them sacred victors. In death, they became something more than men. They were vessels of communion, their spilled blood the price of a city's survival. Modern minds might struggle to reconcile such brutality with spirituality, but the ancients saw no contradiction. To them, the arena was a mirror of the cosmos, chaotic yet ordered, cruel yet necessary. The gods demanded proof of devotion, and what offering could be more precious than life itself? When the crowd roared approval, they weren't just cheering, they were bearing witness to a pact between earth and heaven, sealed in scarlet. Look closely at the arches framing an amphitheater's entrance. What seems like mere decoration is actually a silent sermon in stone. Each curve mirrors the path of the sun, a deliberate nod to solar deities who watched over these spaces. The columns weren't just structural, they stood like boundary markers between worlds, their fluted grooves channeling shadows that moved like sundials during sacred hours. Even the number of tiers often held meaning. 12 levels might symbolize the Olympian gods, while 4 sections could represent the cardinal directions, anchoring the arena as the center of the universe. Take the Colosseum's famous velarium, that vast awning stretched overhead. Modern minds see it as simple shade for spectators, but its canvas was painted with stars and zodiac signs, turning the arena into a microcosm of the heavens. When sunlight filtered through, constellations danced across the sand, a reminder that every battle below was mirrored in the skies above, and those underground tunnels everyone associates with gladiators. They were called the Underworld for a reason. Their dark labyrinths deliberately echoed mythic journeys to Hades, making each fighter's ascent into the arena a symbolic resurrection. Even the materials whispered secrets. Travertine stone, chosen for its pale hue, wasn't just durable, it reflected moonlight during nighttime ceremonies, turning the entire structure into a glowing altar. The iron clamps binding the blocks weren't merely practical. Their zigzag patterns mimicked lightning bolts sacred to Jupiter, and that sand covering the floor. Its name, Harina, didn't just mean grit. It derived from the word for altar, a linguistic clue to its ritual purpose. Workers sifted it after every event, removing bloodied patches to be burned in temple braziers, transforming violence into vapor offerings. The statues flanking the entrances were more than art. A Diana with her bow reminded beast hunters of divine favor, while a Neptune near the flooding mechanisms blessed mock naval battles. But the most potent symbol might be the simplest, the central gate called the Porta Triumphalis. Gladiators entered here not as men but as avatars of myth, their processions mirroring a general's victory parade. To pass through that arch was to shed humanity and become part of something older, a story where every wound was a stanza, every death a crescendo in an epic poem written in blood and light. These architectural choices reveal a startling truth. There was no backstage in an amphitheater. Every inch was performative, every stone a participant in the ritual. From the drains that carried blood away like sacrificial libations to the imperial box positioned at the celestial north, these buildings were machines for manufacturing meaning. They didn't just host sacred acts, they were sacred acts, their very geometry a prayer in 3 dimensions. When you walk their ruins today, you're not just tracing footsteps of the past, you're reading a scripture carved in limestone and iron, one that still hums with the echoes of 1,000 whispered devotions. When the emperor raised his hand to signal the start of the games, it wasn't just a ruler giving an order, it was a high priest invoking the gods. The imperial box in the amphitheater wasn't merely a VIP seat, it was a sacred space positioned like the celestial throne of Jupiter himself. Every gesture, every word spoken by the emperor during these spectacles carried the weight of divine sanction. This wasn't political theater, it was political theology, where the roar of the crowd became a chorus of collective faith in the ruler's godlike authority. The munera, those lavish gladiatorial games, were far more than entertainment. They were public liturgies funded by the emperor as both benefactor and intermediary between Rome and the gods. Think of Augustus, who staged games to honor his deified adoptive father Julius Caesar, blurring the line between family tribute and state religion, or Commodus, who entered the arena dressed as Hercules, his club and lion skin transforming bloodsport into a living myth. These performances weren't vanity projects, they were carefully crafted rituals reinforcing a central idea that the emperor's power flowed from the divine. Even the timing of these events wove them into the fabric of worship. Games often coincided with religious festivals, Saturnalia, Floralia, the birthdays of deified emperors, turning holidays into hybrid celebrations of piety and imperial might. The opening parade, or pompa, mirrored religious processions, with gladiators dressed as underworld spirits and priests carrying effigies of the gods alongside portraits of the ruling family. By the time the fighting began, the boundary between state ceremony and sacred rite had dissolved completely. This fusion reached its peak with the imperial cult, where living emperors received offerings like deities. In amphitheaters across the empire, altars burned incense not just to Mars or Diana, but to the genius, the divine spirit of the emperor. In Ephesus, gladiators swore oaths before statues of the emperor alongside traditional gods. In Lyon, the annual games included sacrifices to Rome and Augustus on an altar inscribed with the names of 60 Gallic tribes, a stark reminder that loyalty to the empire was now a sacred duty. Yet this spiritual stagecraft had a pragmatic edge. When an emperor like Titus inaugurated the Coliseum with 100 days of games, the free bread and extravagant spectacles weren't just bribes, they were sacraments of stability. In a world without newspapers or television, the amphitheater became the empire's most powerful medium. Its sand-strewn floor a canvas where rulers painted their legitimacy in sweat and blood. The message was clear: as long as the games continued, the gods smiled on Rome, and the emperor was their chosen instrument. But this symbiosis of cross and crown couldn't last forever. When Christianity rose, its martyrs disrupted the script. Their defiant deaths in the arena turned imperial ritual into subversion. A gladiator's obedient end had once affirmed the divine order. A Christian's fearless martyrdom exposed its fragility. The amphitheater, once the beating heart of imperial theology, became a battleground for competing truths, proof that even the mightiest symbols can't forever dictate where mortals place their faith. When the gates creaked open and a lion padded into the arena, the crowd didn't just see an animal. They saw a walking symbol of wilderness itself, a living embodiment of chaos dragged into the realm of men. The Venations, those brutal beast hunts, were never just about exotic slaughter. Each creature carried meaning. The leopard with its spots like constellations became night sky incarnate. The bull, a sacrificial offering to Mithras. The crocodile, a Nile demon summoned for Roman judgment. These weren't random executions but carefully staged dramas where every death reinforced a deeper story. One where civilization, represented by the hunter's spear, always conquered untamed nature. Consider the mythic parallels woven into these spectacles. A huntsman wearing Hercules' lion skin battling a giant boar wasn't merely entertainment, it was a reenactment of the Erymanthian boar legend, transforming sand into sacred ground. When archers felled stags with silver-painted arrows, they channeled Diana, goddess of the hunt. Even the exoticism served a purpose. Elephants from Africa or tigers from Persia weren't just rarities but living trophies of Rome's global reach, their deaths proving no corner of the earth lay beyond imperial control. Yet the sacred undercurrents ran deeper. Many animals arrived with priests in tow, Egyptian cults accompanying hippos, Cybele's attendants parading lions, and their slaughter often mirrored temple rites. The bull's death, for instance, followed the same blade path used in Mithraic tauroctony, where its blood was believed to fertilize the world. Some scholars argue the mourning hunts, conducted in near silence, functioned as communal sacrifices, their bloodied sand later scattered on fields as apotropaic fertilizer. But let's not romanticize the Venations were also raw displays of power. When Emperor Probus flooded the arena to stage a nautical battle with hippos, or Commodus decapitated ostriches with crescent-headed arrows, the message was clear: Rome could bend even nature's mightiest to its will. The line between ritual and propaganda blurred. Each collapsing giraffe or baited bear was both offering and advertisement. What's fascinating is how these hunts evolved. Early Republic versions were modest affairs, local wolves or boars. But as Rome expanded, so did its menagerie of metaphors. Pompey's games in 55 BC introduced rhinoceroses. Julius Caesar's featured the first giraffe, dubbed camelopard for its strangeness. By the Colosseum's peak, engineers devised rotating forests and pop-up mountains to heighten the drama, turning ecology into theater. Yet for all their spectacle, the hunts left uneasy echoes. Some philosophers like Seneca recoiled at the casual cruelty, while mosaics from wealthy villas show captured animals with startling empathy, a leopard mid-roar, a gazelle's liquid eye. Even in their engineered deaths, these creatures retained a weird holiness, as if their sacrifice held a meaning no amount of imperial pomp could fully contain. That tension between reverence and ruthlessness might be the most Roman thing of all. The roar of the crowd in an ancient amphitheater wasn't just noise, it was the sound of a city breathing together. While we remember these spaces for their bloodiest spectacles, they were also stages for the quieter, brighter moments of communal life. Imagine festival days when the sand was swept clean, the gates thrown open, and the arena transformed into a vibrant fairground. Merchants set up stalls along the corridors, selling spiced wine and amulets. Children weaved through the crowds, their laughter bouncing off the stone. Officials climbed the podium to announce harvest yields or imperial decrees, their voices carried by the same acoustics that amplified battle cries. This wasn't just a building, it was a living, pulsing center of civic life. Think of the annual Floralia festival when Rome's amphitheaters burst with color. Instead of gladiators, dancers swirled across the arena, their robes dyed with saffron and indigo, scattering petals to honor Flora, goddess of spring. Or the Saturnalia celebrations where social norms flipped, masters served meals to enslaved people, and the crowd threw dice from the stands in raucous games of chance. Even the seating arrangements told a story. While hierarchies were rigid during combat, senators in front, women in back, festivals saw these lines soften. For a few days each year, the amphitheater became a rare space where all layers of society shared the same air, the same rhythms, the same collective heartbeat. This duality, sacred and secular, brutal and joyous, wasn't accidental. Ancient architects understood that a city needed more than temples and forums. It needed spaces where emotion could flow freely. The amphitheater's design facilitated this. Its circular shape wasn't just for sightlines, it created a psychological container, a bowl that held shared experiences. When thousands gasped at a tightrope walker's daring stunt or cheered a local hero receiving honors, they weren't just spectators, they were participants in a ritual of belonging. The same walls that echoed with the clash of swords also resonated with wedding vows, poetic recitals, and the collective sighs of audiences moved by a traveling tragedian's performance. Modern parallels are everywhere. The way football stadiums host concerts and prayer vigils alongside matches, or how public squares double as protest sites and holiday markets. But the ancients took it further. An amphitheater wasn't just a venue, it was a symbol of the city's soul. In Pompeii, election notices were painted on its outer walls. In Verona, citizens gathered there to debate taxes, and in times of crisis, these arenas became shelters, their sturdy arches protecting families during earthquakes or invasions. What's striking is how seamlessly these functions intertwined. A morning might start with a solemn sacrifice at the arena's altar, transition into a raucous comedy at noon, and climax with a dusk procession honoring the emperor. The blood of ritual bulls mixed with the scent of roasting chestnuts sold in the stands. This wasn't compartmentalization, it was a holistic understanding of community, where worship, commerce, and entertainment were threads in the same vibrant tapestry. The genius of these spaces lay in their adaptability. The same mechanisms that lowered gladiators into the arena could elevate actors for a play. The drains that carried away battle runoff also irrigated festival gardens planted temporarily on the sand. Even the vomitoria, those efficient passageways designed to move crowds swiftly, became market alleys between events. Every architectural choice served multiple masters, much like the cities themselves. Perhaps that's why ruins like the Colosseum still draw millions. We don't just see stones, we recognize a blueprint for togetherness. In an age of digital isolation, there's something primal in standing where thousands once stood, feeling the ghost of their collective presence. The amphitheater whispers that even in our differences, we share a hunger to be part of something larger, to roar as one, to mourn as one, to celebrate as one. Its true legacy isn't the violence it hosted, but the unity it forged, sand grain by sand grain, generation after generation. The sand of the amphitheater, once stained with the blood of gladiators, soon soaked up a different kind of sacrifice, the martyrs of early Christianity. When Nero first pinned the blame for Rome's great fire on this fledgling sect in 64 AD, he set a grim precedent: persecution as performance. Christians weren't just executed, they were staged, thrown to lions at noon between hunts and comedy acts. Their deaths became another act in the imperial circus. Yet what emperors intended as a deterrent, a visceral warning against defying Roman gods, backfired spectacularly. Instead of silencing the faithful, these public torments forged a powerful new narrative: the martyr as holy warrior, their suffering a direct challenge to pagan power. Consider the account of Perpetua and Felicity, two noblewomen executed in Carthage's amphitheater in 203 AD. Their prison diary, smuggled out by supporters, describes visions of battling not beasts but the devil himself in the arena. By the time they entered the actual gates, the crowd didn't see trembling victims, they saw radiant figures singing hymns, their calm so unnerving some spectators demanded their release. This wasn't the script Rome had written. The amphitheater's carefully choreographed violence, meant to showcase imperial dominance, suddenly crackled with subversion. Every cheer for the lions now carried an unintended question: who was really being judged here? The architecture itself became complicit in this inversion. Those same vomitoria that once disgorged gladiators now paraded Christians toward their deaths, transforming passageways of spectacle into via dolorosas. The emperor's box, positioned to oversee victories, now presided over scenes of astonishing defiance, men and women refusing to renounce their god even as bears mauled them. And the sand, it drank their blood just as eagerly, but this time the stains birthed legends. Spectators took home stories of martyrs embracing death like lovers, of fragrances like flowers rising from the carnage. The arena's brutal efficiency, designed to dehumanize, instead sanctified. By the 4th century, the tables had turned completely. Constantine's conversion didn't just legalize Christianity, it triggered a profound architectural reckoning. Amphitheaters, once temples of Roman piety, were dismantled or repurposed. In Rome, the Coliseum stones were hauled away to build hospitals. In Tarragona, Spain, a church rose directly from an arena's center, its altar marking the spot where martyrs had fallen. The symbolism couldn't be clearer. The blood of the persecuted had consecrated these spaces more thoroughly than any pagan rite. This transformation reveals a startling truth about sacred spaces: they're never neutral. The same curvature that amplified Gladiators' last breaths now echoed with psalms. The gates that once ushered in beasts became processional routes for Easter vigils. Even the elliptical shape, once perfect for keeping combatants encircled, now mirrored the endless circle of Christian eternity. What began as a stage for crushing dissent ended up nurturing the very faith it tried to erase. The martyrs didn't just die in these arenas, they claimed them, turning instruments of terror into theaters of transcendence. And in that paradox lies their ultimate victory. The lions are gone, but the hymns still linger in the stones. Walk into the ruins of an ancient amphitheater today, clap your hands just once, and you'll understand the genius humming in those stones. That crisp echo bouncing back isn't an accident. It's acoustic alchemy, perfected over centuries to turn human speech into something supernatural. The Greeks called this phenomenon echeia, the science of sound reflection, but its purpose went far beyond mere audibility. When an oracle stood in the circular orchestra of Epidaurus, her prophecies didn't just travel upward. They seemed to descend from the heavens themselves, each syllable amplified by stone curves tuned like a musical instrument. This wasn't simple physics, it was sacred engineering. Architects shaped every surface to manipulate belief. The semicircular design of Greek theaters, for instance, didn't just prevent sound from escaping, it created a sonic funnel, channeling voices toward the theatron, the seeing place, where audiences didn't just hear words but felt them vibrate in their chests. The Romans took this further, lining their amphitheaters with resonating chambers, hollow pots embedded in walls or bronze discs suspended overhead that acted as ancient amplifiers. When Emperor Augustus spoke from the Colosseum's pulpitum, his voice didn't sound human. It rolled across the crowd like thunder, a deliberate auditory illusion of divinity. Consider the theater of Dionysus in Athens, where the very ground underfoot played its part. The limestone seats weren't just carved for comfort. Their porous texture absorbed low-frequency crowd noise while reflecting high-pitched voices with crystal clarity. Actors wearing masks with exaggerated mouth openings became living megaphones, their declarations ricocheting off the skein building behind them in layered waves. The result, a single priestess whispering libations could sound as commanding as a general shouting orders. But the true mastery lay in timing. Ancient builders understood that sound moves at roughly 340 meters per second, a heartbeat's delay between seeing a sword strike and hearing it in the highest rows. So they calibrated tier heights to stagger echoes, ensuring cheers and gasps rippled through the crowd in cascading unison rather than chaotic noise. This sonic choreography turned collective reactions into a single organism's pulse, heightening the emotional grip of every performance. Modern studies reveal even subtler tricks. The stepped seating acted like acoustic filters, damping harsh consonants while preserving vowel tones that carried emotion. Wind patterns were mapped to avoid disruptive gusts. Epidaurus aligns with summer breezes that carry sound uphill. Even the morning sun played its role, warming stone to optimal density for resonance by midday performances. Every element conspired to create what the Romans called vox Dei, the voice of the gods, a fusion of science and spirituality where mortal speech transcended its limits. This sonic magic wasn't reserved for elites. In Rome's provincial arenas, local officials exploited the same effects to awe citizens. A governor pronouncing verdicts from the tribunal bench would hear his words gain unnatural weight as they climbed the stands, the architecture lending authority his birthright hadn't. Rebel leaders knew it too, when Spartacus's allies reportedly seized amphitheaters to rally revolts. They chose these stages precisely because their voices would carry the ring of destiny. The legacy lives on. Today's concert halls still borrow the vineyard terrace layout from Greco-Roman designs, and political rallies instinctively seek bowl-shaped spaces. But something vital has been lost, that sacred intentionality. When ancient worshippers heard a chant swirl around them like invisible incense, they weren't just admiring engineering, they were experiencing sound as sacrament, the very air vibrating with the promise that human and divine could share a single breath. The gladiator raising his sword in the arena wasn't always a condemned man or enslaved prisoner. Sometimes he was a volunteer, a seeker of something far greater than survival. That oath they swore, Iuri vincere verberare, to endure fire, chains, and scourging, wasn't just a grim contract. It was a sacred vow, whispered with the same solemnity as a priest's initiation. For every desperate soul forced into the sand, there were others who stepped in willingly, drawn by the allure of fame, fortune, or something more intangible, a chance to touch the divine through combat. Take the case of Flamma, the Syrian gladiator whose tombstone records an astonishing career. 4 times he won the wooden sword, the symbol of freedom, and 4 times he chose to return to the arena. Why would anyone refuse liberty for more bloodshed? The answer lies in the arena's strange alchemy of risk and reward. A skilled fighter could amass wealth beyond a common citizen's dreams, his winnings funding lavish banquets, adoring fans, even political connections. But beyond material gains, there was the intoxicating promise of becoming legend. To fight well was to be immortalized in mosaics, poems, and graffiti scrawled on city walls, your name chanted by thousands as you walked the line between mortal and myth. Yet the spiritual dimension ran deeper. Gladiators trained in schools called ludi, spaces that blurred the line between barracks and temples. Here, they practiced under the watchful eyes of statues: Hercules for strength, Mercury for speed, Nemesis for fate. Their weapons were consecrated in rituals, their pre-fight meals mimicked sacrificial feasts. When they entered the arena, they weren't just fighters, they were actors in a sacred drama, their deaths echoing the stories of gods and heroes. To fall bravely was to join a lineage of warriors honored in the Underworld, their courage earning them a place in Elysium. This duality, warrior and worshipper, challenges modern assumptions. We imagine gladiators as victims, but many saw themselves as agents of their own destiny. Their helmets, often inscribed with phrases like "I bring death" or "the crowd's favorite," reveal a fierce pride. Even their fighting styles carried spiritual weight. The Mirmillo, with his fish-crested helmet, paid homage to Neptune. The Retiarius, armed with trident and net, channeled the sea god's wrath. Every match was a ritual reenactment, where the sand became a liminal space between earth and the divine. Perhaps the most striking evidence lies in the gladiators' farewell. Unlike common criminals whose bodies were dumped like refuse, fallen fighters often received dignified burials. Their graves bore inscriptions like "He died as he lived without fear," or "The gods welcomed him as a champion." Some were even memorialized with the same honors as fallen soldiers, their names etched alongside dedications to Mars or Dis Pater. In death, they achieved what few could claim, a transcendence that turned violence into sacrament and the arena into a gateway to eternity. This isn't to romanticize their reality. The life was brutal, short, and often coerced. But to dismiss all gladiators as unwilling pawns is to miss the profound cultural tapestry. They inhabited one where glory and piety, savagery and sanctity were threads in the same bloody fabric. Their stories force us to reckon with an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most sacred acts wear the mask of violence, and the path to immortality is paved with willing sacrifice. The Colosseum's transformation from blood-stained arena to hallowed ground wasn't a sudden shift. It was a slow, seismic change in how humanity remembers. By the 6th century, as Rome's power waned, the great amphitheater had already begun its second life. Squatters built homes within its arches, blacksmiths fired forges in its vaulted passages, and monks scratched crosses into its stones, reclaiming the space for their own faith. What emperors had built to showcase mortal combat, time repurposed as a testament to survival. The same sand that once drank the blood of martyrs now sprouted wildflowers, as if the earth itself were offering absolution. This metamorphosis wasn't unique. Across Europe, amphitheaters became palimpsests of meaning. In Arles, France, the arena became a fortified village, its towering walls sheltering hundreds of homes and even 2 churches, a literal layering of sacred over profane. Nîmes Amphitheater hosted medieval jousts, turning gladiatorial combat into chivalric spectacle. The stones remembered their purpose, even if the scripts had changed. But the most poignant reinvention might be in Verona, where the ancient arena's acoustics, once tuned to amplify death cries, now carry opera arias to enraptured crowds. When Tosca sings of love and sacrifice under the stars, the ghosts of the past don't protest, they harmonize. The 18th century brought a new layer of reverence. Pope Benedict XIV didn't just consecrate the Colosseum, he declared it sanctified by the blood of martyrs, erecting stations of the cross amid its ruins. Pilgrims who once flocked to see gladiators now walk the same passages in penitent silence, touching stones that seemed to hum with history. This sanctification wasn't merely symbolic, it saved the structure from being quarried into oblivion. What the Roman Empire couldn't achieve with legions, the Church accomplished with a single decree, preserving the amphitheater not as a relic of violence, but as a monument to redemption. Yet these spaces refuse to be pinned to a single narrative. Modern archaeologists peeling back the layers find surprises: medieval love poems scratched into mortar, Renaissance alchemist symbols hidden in underground chambers, even graffiti from Napoleonic soldiers who camped there. Each generation writes its own story onto these stones, proving that amphitheaters were never just stages for spectacle. They were mirrors, reflecting back whatever society needed to see, be it imperial might, divine judgment, or the enduring power of collective memory. Today, when tourists run their fingers over the Colosseum's pockmarked walls, they're touching more than ancient concrete. They're connecting with a living chronicle of reinvention, where every chip and stain tells a story of resilience. The amphitheater's greatest lesson might be this: no space is forever defined by its darkest hour. Given enough time, even the stones learn to sing a new song. Beneath the flickering torchlight of an imperial arena, a figure clad in bronze armor raised her sword, not as a man's shadow, but as a force of her own. Female gladiators, though rare, carved their names into history with every defiant strike, shattering the rigid gender norms of antiquity. These women weren't mere novelties. Their presence in the sand was often tied to sacred rites, particularly those honoring goddesses like Diana, huntress and protector, or Bellona, the fierce deity of war. When they fought, it wasn't just for spectacle, it was a ritual act, their combat echoing the celestial battles of divine sisters who defied expectations long before mortals dared. Take the infamous Amazonia and Achilia, whose names survive on a 1st-century marble relief from Halicarnassus. Clad in the garb of legendary warriors, they faced each other not as enemies but as partners in a sacred dance of steel, their match likely staged during the Floralia festival honoring Flora, goddess of fertility and renewal. Their dual blurred lines between theater and combat, male and female, mortal and myth. Roman writers like Cassius Dio sneered at such displays, calling them shameful, but the crowds, they roared approval, tossing flowers instead of the usual bread. Here was something transcendent: women embodying the same virtues of courage and skill lauded in male gladiators, yet channeling a distinctly feminine ferocity that unsettled and enthralled. The spiritual undercurrents ran deep. Some female fighters, known as Ludii, were linked to the cult of Isis, their bouts symbolizing the goddess's triumph over chaos. Others, like those depicted on Pompeii's frescoes wearing nothing but loincloths and greaves, may have reenacted the myth of the Amazons, their bare limbs challenging Roman ideals of modesty while invoking warrior priestesses of old. Even their armor held meaning: breastplates molded to female forms, helmets crowned with crescent moons for Diana, or Medusa's snarling face to turn opponents to stone. Every detail whispered that these women weren't just fighting men, they were battling the very notions that sought to confine them, yet their legacy is fraught with contradictions. Excavations from London to Turkey reveal small, finely crafted gladiatrix weapons, some ceremonial, others battle-worn, suggesting a spectrum of roles from ritual performers to genuine combatants. The Senatus Consultum of 19 AD officially banned noblewomen from the arena, not out of concern for their safety, but because their participation dishonored elite-class distinctions. But lower-class women and enslaved fighters, the games needed their audacity. When the Emperor Septimius Severus finally banned all female gladiators in 200 AD, his edict cited morality. Yet mosaics from his reign still show women battling beasts, their faces alight with something too fierce to extinguish. Perhaps the most haunting evidence comes from Ostia's necropolis, where a 1st-century tombstone depicts a woman named Europa in full gladiatorial regalia, her hand resting tenderly on the shoulder of a fellow fighter. The inscription calls her Victrix, a victorious but also Canunx, spouse. Here lies the heart of the mystery. These women were both rebels and traditionalists, breaking societal molds while upholding ancient ideals of honor and devotion. Their blood spilled in the sand wasn't just a sacrifice to imperial vanity. It was an offering to something older, a truth that the arena, for all its brutality, couldn't suppress. That courage wears no gender, and the gods listen to all who call with a sword in hand. The roar of the crowd took on a strange, watery echo as the Colosseum's floor began to vanish beneath a rising tide. One day it held gladiators, the next it became an inland sea, its depths swallowing the sand to make way for triremes and warring fleets. These naumatia weren't just extravagant shows, they were liquid hymns to Neptune, the god who ruled both storms and calm. Imagine the gasp of spectators as the first ships emerged, their prows gliding through what had hours earlier been a battlefield. This wasn't mere stagecraft, it was hydraulic alchemy, turning stone into sacred ocean for battles that blurred history, myth, and devotion. The engineering behind these spectacles boggles the mind. Ancient sources describe crews working through the night, diverting aqueducts through hidden channels to flood the arena. In the Colosseum, a labyrinth of lead pipes and sluice gates lay beneath the sand, capable of filling the space with over 1 million gallons of water in hours. But the real marvel was the timing. These floods often coincided with Neptune's festivals, turning the arena into a colossal offering bowl. When Emperor Titus inaugurated his Naumatia in 80 AD, he didn't just celebrate military victories, he reenacted the Battle of Salamis, casting himself as Poseidon blessing Athenian triremes. The symbolism was liquid clarity. Rome didn't just conquer land, it commanded the seas by divine right. The participants in these mock battles, usually prisoners of war or condemned criminals, fought knowing their struggle held cosmic weight. Their oars weren't just props, they were dipped in sacred paint, their strokes synchronized to hymns for safe voyages. Some accounts describe ships rigged to sink dramatically at the climax, their crews desperate, swimming, mimicking sailors lost to storms, a visceral plea to Neptune for mercy upon real fleets. Even the water itself was ritually significant. after the spectacle, portions were bottled and given to merchants as blessings for their trade routes, transforming the arena's runoff into holy water. What's often overlooked is how these events mirrored temple rituals. In Austria's Temple of Neptune, priests would flood a miniature replica harbor during ceremonies, complete with tiny ships. The Colosseum's Naumatia scaled this practice to staggering proportions, making the entire populace witnesses to a divine dialogue. When Claudius staged a battle on Lake Fucinus involving 19,000 men and 50 ships, he didn't just want spectacle. He sought to sanctify Rome's naval dominance, turning human conflict into a covenant with the deep. Yet for all their grandeur, these flooded battles were fleeting miracles. The same mechanisms that conjured the sea could banish it by dawn, the water draining away to reveal sand once more, damp but unmarked, as if the ocean had been a shared dream. That impermanence was the point. Like the tides themselves, the Naumatia reminded Rome that even its might was subject to forces older than empires. The ships sank, the god was appeased, and the arena stood ready for its next transformation, proof that stone could hold not just blood or prayer, but the very essence of the sea. When the gates of Rome's amphitheaters swung open, they didn't just unleash lions, they unleashed a tidal wave of foreign gods, rituals, and myths that transformed the arena into a crossroads of civilizations. Take the Egyptian goddess Isis, whose cult swept through Rome like a desert wind. During games honoring her, the sand might be dyed blue to mimic the Nile, and crocodiles sacred to Sobek were pitted against fighters dressed as Horus, their battles reenacting the eternal struggle between order and chaos. This wasn't mere exoticism, it was theological theater, where Roman crowds witnessed the cosmic dramas of distant lands without leaving their seats. Persian influences ran just as deep. When Emperor Trajan celebrated his victories over Parthia, he staged a spectacle where gladiators wore silver-scale armor and spired helmets, their combat mimicking the legendary battles of Rostam and Sohrab from the Shahnameh epic. The crowd didn't need to know the stories, the symbolism transcended language. The Persian god Mithras, already popular among Roman soldiers, found his way into the arena through tauroctony rituals. Bull-slaying scenes painted on the walls of the Ludus Magnus gladiator school mirrored the iconography of Mithraic temples. Even the underground chambers where fighters waited became accidental Mithraea, their shadowy vaults echoing the caves where initiates worshipped. From the east came stranger imports. Syrian sun priests processed through the arena bearing golden discs of Sol Invictus, their chants blending with the roar of beasts from their homeland, leopards from Aleppo, bears from Armenia. Cappadocian horsemen staged mock skirmishes where their ancestral moon goddess men's crescent symbol gleamed on shields. And when Commodus played at being Hercules, his club and lion skin weren't just Greek props. They were layered with Hittite storm god imagery, a deliberate fusion of conqueror and conquered. The most poignant cross-cultural exchanges happened in the margins. A graffiti scroll in Pompeii's Amphitheater depicts a gladiator with the name Memnon, likely a Nubian fighter whose presence evoked the Ethiopian hero of Greek myth. In Austria, a mosaic shows a Retiarius net fighter with distinctly Berber tattoos, his trident echoing Neptune but his patterns whispering of Saharan tribal marks. These weren't just fighters, they were living bridges between worlds, their bodies canvases where empire and tradition collided. This cultural alchemy reached its peak with the Magna Mater, the great mother goddess imported from Phrygia. Her wild, drum-heavy rites, complete with self-flagellating priests, initially shocked Romans, but by the imperial era, her April festival, the Megalesia, featured prominently in the games. Galley priests castrated in her honor would scatter violet petals from the arena's edge, their eerie cries merging with the howls of lions, her sacred animal. What began as foreign spectacle became Roman ritual, proof that the amphitheater didn't just host violence, it digested entire religions, reforging them into something both familiar and thrillingly strange. The genius of Rome was never in purity, but in synthesis. When a Thracian gladiator raised his curved Sika sword in salute, he wasn't just wielding a weapon. He was swinging a piece of his homeland's soul, now consecrated to Roman gods. The sand drank blood from every corner of the empire, and with each drop, the arena became less a stage and more a mirror, reflecting back the dazzling, chaotic tapestry of cultures that Rome both ruled and was remade by. The staggering cost of a single day's games in the Colosseum could bankrupt modern millionaires, yet Roman elites lined up for the privilege of funding them. When Emperor Titus inaugurated the amphitheater with 100 days of continuous spectacles, the bill included not just gladiators and beasts, but exotic scenery, lavish gifts tossed to the crowd, and even a mock naval battle requiring the arena's complete flooding. The price tag, estimates suggest over 200 million sesterces, enough to feed the entire city for months. But this wasn't mere extravagance, it was sacred economics, where wealth flowed like sacrificial wine into the sand. Patricians didn't open their coffers out of generosity alone. Inscriptions from Pompeii to Lyon reveal how sponsors meticulously recorded their expenditures, framing them as vows fulfilled to the gods rather than vanity projects. A wealthy merchant named Aulus Clodius Flaccus boasted in stone that his games honored Apollo's healing power after his daughter recovered from fever. Another in Ostia dedicated his spectacle to Neptune following a profitable shipping season. These weren't receipts, they were prayer stones, financial transactions dressed in sacred vestments. The message was clear: every coin spent bought divine favor as surely as it bought public applause. The financial machinery behind these events was as intricate as the games themselves. Specialized bankers called negotiators munerarii loaned money at steep interest to would-be sponsors, knowing the social capital was worth the risk. Gladiator troops operated as profitable businesses, their owners leasing fighters to multiple events like sacred mercenaries. Even the beasts had price tiers. A North African lion cost 5 times more than a Syrian bear, their rarity making them living offerings of greater worth. The most revealing records come from Ephesus, where temple accountants kept dual ledgers, one tracking silver spent on animals and fighters, another noting equivalent sacrifices at Artemis's altar. The books balanced in blood and coin, yet the true currency was political influence. Ambitious officials like Julius Caesar famously plunged into debt-hosting games, knowing the crowd's cheers could propel them to higher office. When Claudius staged his massive naval battle on Lake Fucinus, the spectacle wasn't just for Neptune, it was a calculated display of imperial reach to nervous senators. Even the distribution of free food during events followed sacred geometry. Loaves marked with Ceres' wheat sheaf symbol were tossed precisely to sectors where key voters sat. The arena became a temple where political fortunes rose and fell with each thumbs up or down. This fusion of faith and finance left permanent marks. In Verona's amphitheater, grooves in the stone stairs aren't from erosion, they're tally marks where ticket sellers recorded admissions against promised donations. London's amphitheater excavations revealed lead tokens stamped with Minerva's owl, likely given to vendors as sacred script redeemable for goods. And in Carthage, a mosaic shows a banker's scale balanced between a bag of coins and a gladiator's helmet, watched over by Mercury, god of commerce and messengers. The image captures the amphitheater's unspoken truth. Devotion had its price, and even the gods understood the mathematics of salvation. What makes these transactions fascinating isn't their scale, but their sincerity. Modern eyes might see cynical calculation, but Romans genuinely believed funding games pleased the divine as surely as building temples did. When a senator's inscription claims his spectacle restored harmony between gods and men, he meant it literally. The roaring crowd's approval was cosmic validation. The sand drank both blood and silver, and from that mingling rose something beyond entertainment, a living economy of belief where the road to heaven was paved with gold and good seats. Beneath the roar of the crowd and the crunch of sand underfoot, another world pulsed in near darkness, a maze of damp corridors where whispers clung to the walls like ghosts. These underground chambers weren't just backstage areas, they were spiritual waystations, places where men prepared to cross the threshold between mortal and myth. Picture a gladiator kneeling in the flickering light of an oil lamp, his fingers brushing the cool stone of a Mithraic altar as he murmured prayers to the god who understood both killers and the slain. The air here smelled of sweat, incense, and the iron tang of weapons freshly anointed with sacred oils. Every corner held its own ritual. Here, a priest traced symbols of protection on a fighter's forehead with ash. There, a condemned criminal clutched a tiny effigy of Mercury, hoping the messenger god might speed his soul to the afterlife. The architecture itself whispered of duality. Narrow passageways called Passages of the Doomed sloped upward toward the arena's bright glare, designed to disorient fighters and heighten their sense of stepping into another realm. Hidden niches housed shrines to Nemesis, her stone face lit by candles that never fully dispelled the shadows because fate, like these tunnels, was never fully illuminated. Even the cells had spiritual dimensions. Larger ones held wild beasts, their cages positioned near altars to Diana, as if the huntress might temper their fury. Smaller chambers, barely wider than a man's shoulders, were reserved for last rites, their walls scratched with pleas to Dis Pater or Hades. Accept me kindly. One inscription reads, the letters shaky but deliberate. The most haunting space lay directly beneath the arena's center, the spoliarium where fallen gladiators were stripped of armor and prepared for burial. But this wasn't some grim storeroom, it functioned as a sacred workshop. Workers here weren't mere attendants, they were libitinarii, named after Libitina, goddess of funerals. They washed bodies with water drawn from temple wells, wrapped them in shrouds woven by Vestal virgins, and placed coins on their eyes, not just as ferry payment for Charon, but as offerings to Janus, the two-faced god who guarded transitions. A fighter might enter the arena as a slave, but in death he was treated like a hero, his bloodied tunic cut into strips and sold as talismans to fans who believed in its power. Rituals here followed a precise choreography. Before dawn, priests of Mars blessed the iron gratings that would later rise, delivering fighters to the sand. At midday, Vestals lit incense in circular pits beneath the emperor's box, its smoke curling upward as if carrying petitions to the gods. And when the games ended, the tunnels hosted quieter ceremonies. Gladiators who survived poured libations for fallen comrades, their wine mixing with the damp earth in a toast to the dead and the divine. Modern excavations reveal just how layered this underworld was. In Capua's Amphitheater, archaeologists found a chamber with a painted ceiling depicting the zodiac, a celestial map for souls navigating the hereafter. In Mérida, Spain, underground frescoes show Pluto and Proserpina watching over a line of figures, their arms raised not in surrender but in supplication. These weren't decorations, they were guideposts for the journey beyond. The true genius of these spaces wasn't their engineering but their empathy. In the arena, all was noise and spectacle, but below, in the quiet, men faced their mortality with startling intimacy. The tunnels didn't just lead to death, they framed it as a passage, not an end. When a gladiator climbed those final steps into the light, he wasn't just a prisoner or a pawn. For a few breaths, suspended between darkness and dazzle, he was something akin to a priest himself, a living bridge between the worlds above and below, his every footstep a prayer written in the dust. When dawn broke over the Coliseum on the summer solstice, sunlight didn't just spill through its arches, it performed a carefully orchestrated dance. The eastern gate, positioned at a precise angle, allowed the first golden rays to pierce directly across the arena floor, illuminating the Emperor's box like a celestial spotlight. This wasn't accidental geometry, it was sacred astronomy carved in stone. Across the Roman world, amphitheaters doubled as colossal sundials and star maps, their alignments whispering that the games below mirrored dramas unfolding in the heavens above. Consider the orientation of El Jem in Tunisia, its long axis aligned with the path of Venus, the evening star Romans associated with victory. On nights when the planet blazed brightest, its light would frame the arena's central gate, as if blessing those who entered. In Mérida, Spain, the winter solstice sunset perfectly bisects the arena's western arches, flooding the sand with fiery light during Saturnalia festivities, a symbolic marriage of solar power and seasonal revelry. Even the Colosseum's famous awning, the velarium, served dual purposes. Its colored panels filtered sunlight to mark astrological hours, while its pulley system echoed the motions of celestial spheres. The deeper symbolism reveals itself in the details. Gladiatorial combats often began at high noon, when the sun god Sol Invictus ruled the sky, his presence implied by the golden shields adorning the arena walls. Night games, lit by thousands of oil lamps, coincided with lunar phases, full moons for imperial birthdays, new moons for underworld deities. The very sand was ritually raked in spiral patterns mimicking the Milky Way, turning the arena floor into a microcosm of the cosmos. When fighters circled each other, they weren't just dueling, they were reenacting the eternal dance of stars. This celestial choreography reached its peak in the Nomatia, those spectacular naval battles. Ancient sources describe how flooded arenas reflected constellations overhead, creating the illusion that ships sailed through the stars themselves. During Claudius's epic lake battle, the fleets formed shapes mirroring Orion and Scorpio, a deliberate nod to the mythic combat between Hunter and Scorpion immortalized in the night sky. The message was unmistakable. Rome didn't just conquer earth and sea, its destiny was written in the heavens. Archaeoastronomers have uncovered even subtler genius. At Pompeii's Amphitheater, narrow slits in the upper walls cast dagger-like shadows across specific seats during equinoxes, marking where privileged spectators should sit to receive the god's favor. In Carnuntum's arena near Vienna, certain underground chambers amplify the sound of chanting only when the Pleiades star cluster is visible, an acoustic marvel blending astronomy and worship. The true brilliance of these designs lies in their adaptability. Unlike static temples, amphitheaters were living observatories, their alignments shifting meaning with the seasons. The same arch that framed the summer solstice sun might, months later, channel moonlight onto an altar to Diana. The sand that drank blood under Ares' sign in spring became a sacred threshing floor for harvest rites when Virgo rose. This wasn't just architecture, it was celestial poetry written in limestone and sunlight. Modern eyes might miss these nuances, but to ancient spectators, the connections were visceral. When a gladiator raised his sword at noon, he didn't just fight for his life, he became an actor in a cosmic drama, his every move shadowed by the sun's journey. The stars didn't merely watch from above, they leaned close, their ancient patterns lending divine weight to mortal struggles. In the amphitheater's sacred geometry, earth and sky weren't separate realms, they were partners in a grand spectacle, each game a fleeting alignment of human courage and heavenly will. The thunderous cheers that once shook amphitheaters grew quieter as Christianity spread across the empire, its moral tide turning against the spectacle of sacred combat. Church fathers like Tertullian railed against the games, calling them murder consecrated to idols, a direct challenge to Rome's long-held belief that bloodshed in the arena pleased the gods. Yet the real death knell wasn't just moral outrage. It was a seismic shift in how communities experienced the divine. Where crowds had once gathered to witness mortal struggles as acts of worship, now they knelt together in basilicas, their collective fervor channeled into hymns rather than battle cries. The transformation wasn't immediate. Long after Constantine's conversion in the 4th century, amphitheaters still hosted games, though with fewer gladiators and more acrobats. What changed was their spiritual currency. Emperors who once staged combats to honor Mars now funded them as civic amenities, their divine pretenses stripped away like gilding from old statues. The visceral communion between violence and the sacred, so central to Roman identity, fractured. A mosaic from late 4th century Sicily tells the tale, where gladiators once dominated the artwork. Now biblical scenes appeared, their peaceful tableaus replacing the bloody drama of the arena. Yet these structures refused to vanish. Like ancient oaks repurposed as church beams, amphitheaters found new life in Christianity's shadow. In Tarragona, Spain, the arena became a monastery, its cells carved directly into the stone where beasts once paced. Rome's Coliseum sprouted tiny chapels in its arches, the same spaces that had housed altars to Nemesis now sheltering crosses. Most strikingly, the sand that had drunk so much blood became consecrated ground. Pope Boniface VIII declared the Colosseum's soil holy in the 13th century, recognizing the martyrs who had perished there. The stones remembered their past even as they served new masters. This evolution reveals a deeper truth about sacred spaces. They aren't defined by their original purpose, but by humanity's enduring need to gather. When earthquakes toppled amphitheaters in the Middle Ages, locals didn't haul away the rubble. They built homes within the curved walls, turning imperial vanity into communal shelter. In Lucca, Italy, the arena's oval footprint became the foundation for houses that still stand today, their medieval facades hugging the ancient contours like vines on a trellis. The structures outlived the ideologies that birthed them because they answered something timeless, the human craving for connection, whether through shared spectacle or shared survival. The final irony, Christianity, which had condemned the games, eventually staged its own dramas in these spaces. Mystery plays performed in Arles Amphitheater retold Bible stories with the same visceral intensity as gladiatorial combat, David and Goliath's duel mirroring the clashes of old, but now serving a different theology. The crowd still gasped, still wept, still left feeling part of something larger. The vessel remained, only the contents had changed. What faded wasn't the amphitheater's power, but the particular alchemy that once fused faith and violence. Modern visitors sensing awe in these ruins aren't wrong. They're feeling the echo of 1,000 collective breaths, the ghost of communion that no change in doctrine could fully erase. The stones may have forgotten their old gods, but they still remember how to make mortals look upward and wonder. The roar of 60,000 fans in a modern stadium doesn't just echo, it reverberates with the same primal energy that once shook the Coliseum. Step into any major arena today, and you'll find uncanny parallels to those ancient spaces of war and worship. The pre-game rituals, the synchronized chants, the sea of faces united in anticipation, these aren't random behaviors. They're the living legacy of amphitheaters, repurposed for a world where gladiators have been replaced by quarterbacks and the gods of Olympus by team mascots. The sacred fire hasn't been extinguished, it's simply taken new forms. Take the halftime show, that dazzling intermission of music and pyrotechnics. On the surface, it's entertainment, but peel back the layers and you'll find something older. Like the sacrificial ceremonies that once punctuated Roman games, these performances serve as communal rites of renewal, a chance to collectively exhale before the tension builds again. When a pop star descends from the rafters on a glowing platform, the spectacle channels the same awe as an imperial procession honoring Jupiter. Even the timing is ritualistic. The precise 15-minute break mirrors the ancient Ludi's structured intervals between bloodshed and theatrical interludes. The architecture itself whispers of this lineage. Modern stadiums still favor the circular or oval design perfected by the Romans, not just for sightlines but for acoustics that turn individual cheers into a unified thunderclap. The tunnel walk, where athletes emerge from underground passages into blinding light, recreates the gladiators' journey from shadow to spotlight, and those massive jumbotrons looming overhead. They're the digital descendants of the velarium's painted constellations, ensuring no attendee misses a moment of the shared drama. But the most profound connection lies in the crowd's behavior. The Mexican wave snaking through the stands isn't just fun, it's a kinesthetic prayer, a physical manifestation of unity akin to the synchronized gestures of ancient worshippers. Fan chants like Liverpool FC's "You'll Never Walk Alone" or the Icelandic thunderclap carry the same hypnotic rhythm as processional hymns to Demeter or Dionysus. Even the colors matter. Supporters draped in team scarves and face paint mirror the devotees who once wore Isis's silver or Mars's crimson to games, their allegiance worn like armor. Religious language clings stubbornly to these spaces. We speak of stadiums as cathedrals of sport, of athletes making sacrifices for their team, of fans making pilgrimages to hallowed grounds like Wembley or Lambeau Field. The rituals are just as precise. The touching of a baseball player's lucky charm before batting recalls a gladiator kissing his amulet. The soccer player crossing himself before a penalty kick reenacts ancient gestures of divine petition. And when a hockey team hoists the Stanley Cup, their victory lap mirrors the triumphal processions once granted to conquering generals blessed by the gods. This continuity isn't accidental. Neuroscientists studying crowd behavior have found that synchronized cheering releases oxytocin, the same bonding hormone activated in ancient communal worship. The arena, whether stone or steel, taps into something hardwired, our need to belong, to surrender individuality to something larger. When a stadium erupts as a last-second goal soars into the net, the collective euphoria isn't far removed from the ecstatic cries of initiates at Eleusis or the roaring approval of a thumbs up from Caesar's box. Yet there's a crucial difference. Where blood once sealed the pact between mortals and gods, now we trade in symbolic victories. The violence is regulated, the stakes illusory, but the longing behind them remains real. We've traded literal sacrifice for metaphorical struggle, yet the hunger for transcendence persists. That's why losing fans still weep openly, why championships are dubbed immortalizing, why retired jerseys hang like relics in rafters. The amphitheater's shadow stretches long because it answers a timeless question: how to make fleeting moments feel eternal. So next time you join a stadium's roar, listen closely. Beneath the modern veneer of hot dogs and hashtags, you'll hear the ghostly echoes of something far older. The unmistakable sound of human hearts beating in unison, just as they did when sand and blood were the only stage. Hollywood loves its gladiator epics, swords flashing, sand running red, crowds baying for blood. But these cinematic spectacles often miss the deeper truth. Ancient amphitheaters were as much about spirituality as savagery. Take the infamous thumbs down gesture we associate with death sentences. Roman texts suggest it might never have existed, or if it did, the thumb's direction held entirely different meanings. Some scholars argue a concealed thumb symbolized mercy, mimicking a sheathed sword, while an extended thumb represented the killing stroke. This small detail reveals how easily modern assumptions distort history's canvas. Another persistent myth, that all arena combat ended in death. In reality, trained gladiators were expensive investments, with survival rates estimated near 90%. Mosaics from Pompeii show fighters labeled missus released unharmed after impressive performances. Even convicts sentenced to the arena sometimes survived. Inscriptions mention noxii who fought multiple times. The real bloodbaths were reserved for midday executions, where condemned criminals faced beasts or each other with no training. These distinctions mattered profoundly to ancients. The difference between sacred sport and judicial slaughter was as clear as the line between a temple sacrifice and a street brawl. Perhaps the most damaging misconception is that amphitheaters existed solely for entertainment. Modern parallels would be hosting the Super Bowl in a cathedral or holding Broadway shows in a war memorial. Temple inventories from Ephesus list amphitheater ticket sales alongside sacred offerings, proving these events funded religious institutions. In Capua, a gladiator barracks doubled as a Mithraic temple, its underground chambers hosting initiation rites. Even the Colosseum's original name, the Flavian Amphitheater, honored the imperial family's divine status. To dismiss these spaces as mere stadiums is like calling Notre Dame a concert hall because it occasionally hosts music. The archaeological record shatters other stereotypes too. Chemical analysis of arena sand from Verona shows traces of perfumes and incense alongside blood, proof that floral processions and sacred fumigations preceded combat. In Lyon, a 1st century program carved in stone lists a day's events: morning beast hunts dedicated to Diana, followed by prisoner executions mimicking mythological punishments, then gladiatorial bouts honoring Mars. The evening's comedies paid homage to Bacchus. This wasn't random scheduling, it was liturgical choreography, each act a stanza in a day-long hymn to the gods. Modern audiences also underestimate how deeply audiences engaged with these spectacles. Graffiti from Pompeii's amphitheater walls reveals heated debates about fighters' styles. One fan scribbles that a Retiarius named Celadus made the girls sigh, while another criticizes a secutor's footwork. These weren't mindless, bloodthirsty crowds, but discerning spectators who appreciated skill as devoutly as modern fans dissect quarterback stats. A recovered glass beaker shows gladiators named like sports stars, their victories tallied like batting averages. The religious dimension didn't negate the thrill of competition, it elevated it into something transcendent. The most ironic distortion, the idea that Christianity single-handedly ended the games. While church fathers like Augustine condemned them, the decline was gradual and pragmatic. Earthquakes damaged venues, barbarian invasions disrupted supply chains for exotic beasts, and economic crises made funding games unsustainable. By the time Theodoric the Great banned them in the 6th century, most amphitheaters had already transitioned to markets or fortresses. The games didn't die from moral outrage, they faded as the world that birthed them transformed. Peeling back these layers doesn't sanitize history's violence. The arenas were brutal places where lives ended for crowd pleasure. But understanding their complexity enriches our view of antiquity. A world where a single space could host sacred dances and swordplay, where cheers for a gladiator doubled as prayers to Mars, and where the line between priest and performer was as fluid as the sand beneath their feet. The truth isn't less dramatic than the myths, it's infinitely more fascinating. Archaeologists brushing dust from a cracked stone altar in southern France didn't just uncover an artifact, they found a missing piece of the amphitheater's soul. This worn slab, etched with dedications to Nemesis and Mars, still bears dark stains from ancient libations, its surface pocked by centuries of knife marks where worshippers left tokens of gratitude or desperation. It's one of dozens of such discoveries in recent years that are rewriting history, proving these spaces weren't just stages for violence, but sanctuaries where every sword stroke and cheer carried spiritual weight. Take the 2019 excavation at Carnuntum's Amphitheater near Vienna, where ground-penetrating radar revealed a hidden chamber beneath the arena floor. Inside, researchers found a trove of votive offerings, tiny lead swords, miniature gladiator helmets, and wax tablets inscribed with pleas to the gods. One, written in a child's shaky hand, begs Mercury to spare her father, a fighter named Lucius, in tomorrow's games. Another promises Diana a silver arrow if she grants victory. These weren't souvenirs, they were sacred contracts, tangible proof that spectators and combatants alike saw the arena as a conduit to the divine. The most revelatory finds come from Britain's Chester Amphitheater, where archaeologists uncovered a shrine to the local goddess Nemesis Regina. The offerings here span centuries: Celtic coins from the 1st century, Roman eagle figurines, even Christian crosses scratched onto stones centuries later. This layering of devotion suggests something profound. The spiritual significance of these spaces outlasted empires and religions. The same spot where Britons once left offerings for victory later became a place where medieval pilgrims lit candles for martyrs, proving the human need to consecrate sites of intense emotion never faded. Inscriptions tell equally compelling stories. A newly deciphered graffito in Pompeii's amphitheater records not just a gladiator's win, but his vow to Mars: "For the god's favor I give this blade." Chemical analysis of the sand where he fought shows traces of myrrh and burnt barley, evidence of pre-game sacrifices. At El Jem in Tunisia, a mosaic depicts a victorious fighter placing his palm not on a trophy, but on an altar flame, his head wreathed like a priest's. Even the architecture whispers secrets. The Colosseum's recently mapped drainage channels contain animal bones cut in precise patterns, matching descriptions of haruspicy rituals where priests read fortunes in entrails before events. Perhaps the most poignant discovery comes from a lesser-known arena in Turkey. Beneath a section marked "Women's Seating," archaeologists found hundreds of carved stone eyes, ancient talismans left by mothers and wives hoping deities would watch over their loved ones in the sand. Nearby, a fresco shows a veiled figure placing flowers at a tiny shrine mid-combat, proving that even during battles, moments of quiet reverence unfolded in the stands. These finds collectively dismantle old academic assumptions that amphitheaters were purely secular entertainment venues. The evidence now suggests a complex ecosystem where every aspect from ticket sales to the angle of the emperor's box was infused with ritual meaning. When a Retiarius net fighter raised his trident, he wasn't just aiming at an opponent, he was mimicking Neptune's pose from temple statues. The roaring crowd wasn't merely cheering, they were participating in a liturgy where bloodshed and prayer were two sides of the same sacred coin. What emerges from the dirt isn't just broken pottery or faded inscriptions, but a radical reimagining of these spaces as liminal zones where mortals and gods transacted. The sand that absorbed blood also drank wine libations. The gates that unleashed beasts first swung open to admit processions of chanting priests. Modern reconstructions that focus solely on the violence miss the heartbeat beneath, the palpable belief that in the arena's charged air, the divine was always present, leaning forward in anticipation. The same stones that once echoed with the roar of ancient crowds now face a quieter, more insidious enemy time. From the Colosseum's crumbling arches to the lesser-known amphitheaters tucked into Mediterranean hillsides, these monuments to war and worship are locked in a modern-day battle against erosion, pollution, and the sheer weight of centuries. But across Europe and beyond, a quiet army of conservators, archaeologists, and local communities is fighting back with mortar brushes, 3D scanners, and an almost sacred determination to preserve these spaces where history still breathes. Take Verona's arena, where concerts still draw thousands beneath its ancient curves. Recent restorations used an ingenious blend of tradition and technology. Microbial cleaners derived from olive leaves to gently eat away at grime, paired with drones mapping every fissure in the limestone. In Pula, Croatia, engineers stabilized the amphitheater's honey-colored walls with nearly invisible titanium rods, a solution as elegant as the original Roman masonry. But the real innovation lies in the philosophy guiding these projects, no longer just patching cracks, but treating each structure as a living document, its layers of graffiti, repairs, and even plant growth all part of the story to be preserved. The challenges are as varied as the sites themselves. At El Jem in Tunisia, rising groundwater threatens the foundations of this 3rd century giant, its underground passages now perpetually damp. The solution, a solar-powered drainage system that mimics the Romans' own hydraulic genius, quietly pumping water away without the rumble of modern machinery. Meanwhile, in Nimes, France, conservators face a different dilemma: how to protect the arena's intricate carvings from the very hands that come to admire them. Their answer: silicone replicas of the most vulnerable reliefs, perfect down to the tool marks, allowing visitors to touch history without harming it. Yet preservation isn't just about physical repair. In Tarragona, Spain, augmented reality headsets transform crumbling walls into vivid reconstructions, letting visitors see gladiators and priests move through the space as if 2,000 years had melted away. At the London Guildhall's Roman Amphitheater, buried beneath the modern city, sound installations recreate the acoustics of long-silenced crowds, making the past feel startlingly present. These aren't gimmicks, they're bridges across time, ensuring that even as stones weather, the stories they hold remain electric. The tightrope walk between access and conservation requires constant negotiation. Pompeii's amphitheater, scene of that infamous riot in 59 AD, now limits daily visitors to prevent similar chaos from erosion. In contrast, Arles Arena thrives as a working bullring, its ancient stones absorbing the vibrations of modern spectacles. Neither approach is perfect. Tourist dollars fund preservation, but footfall wears away at history. The compromise: strategic zoning, some sections open for immersive experiences, others kept behind glass like the fragile pages of a sacred text. What gives these efforts such urgency is the growing understanding of what's truly at stake. Amphitheaters aren't just relics, they're palimpsests of human experience. When restorers in Merida discovered 7th century Christian graffiti overlying pagan inscriptions, they didn't erase one to highlight the other. They preserved both, honoring how each generation had claimed these spaces anew. Similarly, the bullet scars on the Colosseum's walls from World War II resistance fighters now receive the same careful documentation as ancient gladiatorial graffiti, because history didn't stop when the last lion fell. The most hopeful sign: communities reclaiming these spaces not as tourist traps, but as living heritage. In Lex, Italy, locals gather in their amphitheater for everything from Easter processions to jazz festivals, treating it as their ancestral living room. In Petronell, Austria, schoolchildren replant Roman-era herbs in the arena's cracks, continuing a 2,000-year tradition of greenery softening stone. These acts, small as they seem, are the real preservation, not just maintaining structures, but keeping alive the spirit that once made them pulse with meaning. Because an amphitheater can survive without its marble veneer or velvet ropes, but never without the human heartbeat that first gave it purpose. Standing in the silence of an ancient amphitheater today, pressing your palm against sun-warmed stone, you're not just touching history, you're touching a mirror. These ruins reflect back something unsettling yet familiar, our own tangled relationship with spectacle and sanctity, violence and transcendence. The crowds may have vanished, but their legacy lingers in the way we still gather by the thousands, whether in stadiums or online, chasing that same electric thrill of collective experience. The difference: we've swapped swords for smartphones, gladiators for influencers, and the gods of Olympus for algorithms, yet the human hunger for ritual remains unchanged. Consider how modern sports events unconsciously echo ancient rites. The Super Bowl's halftime show, with its pyrotechnics and anthems, isn't so far removed from the Floralia Festival's processions. Football players smearing war paint under stadium lights channel the same primal energy as Samnite gladiators daubing their faces with sacred ochre. Even the language we use, battles on the field of play, athletes sacrificing their bodies, betrays an instinct to frame competition as something mythic. The Jumbotron might have replaced the Emperor's box, but when 60,000 voices rise in unison, the vibration in your chest feels eerily like what a Roman citizen might have felt during a chariot race's final lap. Yet the amphitheater's true lesson isn't about parallels, it's about paradox. These stones force us to confront how easily reverence and ruthlessness can coexist. We recoil at the brutality of the games, yet binge violent entertainment. We condemn bloodshed but idolize warriors. The ancients at least had the honesty to admit the connection, weaving both impulses into a single sacred tapestry. Their amphitheaters acknowledged a hard truth we often ignore, that humanity's highest and lowest instincts aren't opposites, they're neighbors sharing the same architectural space. Perhaps that's why these ruins still resonate. They don't let us off the hook with easy moralizing. Instead, they ask uncomfortable questions. What are our modern arenas, social media, where likes and shares become a kind of digital thumbs up? Political rallies, where the crowd's roar takes on a fervor bordering on religious ecstasy. Even the way we ritualize grief after tragedy's candlelit vigils, #memorials speaks to that ancient need to sanctify our collective emotions. The vessels have changed, but the wine is the same. Walking out of an amphitheater's shadow into daylight, you might feel the oddest sensation that the past isn't really past. The stones whisper that every generation builds its own stages for the eternal drama: fear and courage, isolation and belonging, the profane and the profound. The echo you hear isn't just from gladiators' footsteps, it's the sound of your own heartbeat, keeping time with a rhythm as old as humanity itself. And that's the most humbling revelation of all. We're still learning to balance the war and the worship within us, still searching for ways to honor the divine without drowning it in the roar of the crowd. From the sands of the Colosseum to the echoes of history, ancient amphitheaters stand as monuments to humanity's dual nature. They were stages where life and death, war and worship, spectacle and sacrament converged in a single breath. These stones hold more than memories, they hold a paradox, a testament to our capacity for both brutality and transcendence. The same curved walls that amplified the screams of combat also carried hymns to the heavens. The same sand that absorbed bloodstains once cradled flower petals tossed in reverence. This duality isn't just a relic, it's a reflection of who we've always been. Look at the way we gather today. Stadiums pulse with the same collective energy that once filled these ancient bowls, their modern rituals just secular cousins of sacred games. When fans paint their faces in team colors or chant in unison, they're tapping into something primal, the same need to belong, to lose oneself in something larger. Even our screens have become digital amphitheaters, where likes and shares replace thumbs up or down, and viral moments spark global reactions as instantaneous as any imperial gesture. The vessels change, but the human impulse remains. Yet there's a crucial difference. Where ancient spectators believed their cheers could sway the gods, we've secularized the stakes. A soccer match might feel like life or death, but no one truly thinks victory will bring a bountiful harvest. Or do they? Superstitions linger. The lucky jersey worn unwashed for playoffs, the pre-game routines followed like sacraments. These tiny rituals hint at an older truth, that deep down we still crave meaning in our spectacles, a thread connecting the mundane to the mythic. The true legacy of these arenas isn't in their architecture, but in their blueprint for human connection. They taught us how to turn space into shared experience, how to amplify emotion through design. Broadway theaters borrow their acoustics, political rallies mimic their sightlines, even TD talks harness the intimacy of the theatron's semicircle. But the most profound inheritance is subtler, the understanding that gathering isn't just about watching. It's about participating, whether through cheers, tears, or the silent communion of collective breath held in suspense. As the sun sets over these ruins, casting long shadows where gladiators and gods once walked, the stones seem to lean closer. They remind us that every era builds its own stages for the eternal drama, the struggle between chaos and order, isolation and belonging. The amphitheater's greatest lesson isn't about the past, it's about recognizing these patterns in ourselves. So the next time you lose yourself in a crowd's roar or feel chills at a shared moment of beauty, listen closely. That's not just noise, it's the echo of 2,000 years, whispering that we're still learning to balance the war and worship within us.